Hello, friends and fellow board gamers. Welcome back to Board Games with Rob.
Board games
And
with Scott, don't you mean?
oh, wait, what? Board Games with Wait, who are
Yeah,
you?
board games with Scott. Well, I don't know what this board games with Rob thing is all about. You
Yeah, yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
I mean, thank you for coming on the show with me here on Board Games with Scott.
Wait, what show is this? Wait, I need to maybe get rid of this logo. Maybe I can
Yeah,
make
I
that
think you got an old
disappear.
logo there. I think you need to
Uh,
update it a little bit.
oh,
Maybe we can
Scott.
make it board games with Rob and Scott, or
There
board
we
games with
go.
Scott and Rob. I don't know which way it sounds better, but just go to board games with
Probably
Scott,
Scott.
and Rob can be a guest. You'll be in the end credits. It'll be great.
Friends, I'll tell you what, I've done about 3 takes of this, and I'm really humbled today because I mean, you wouldn't be in board games if you didn't know Scott Nicholson, and I reached out to him, and he was gracious enough to come on to the show, or to allow me to be on his show for a very special episode. So before there was the Dice Tower, before there was Rado, before there was Rodney, there was Board Games with Scott. When I first got into the hobby 14, 15 years ago, and I was trying to find out anything to do about board games, I went to Board Games with Scott. So I'm really pleased to introduce you to Scott Nicholson. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you. Introduce yourself. I don't know that people need an introduction, but introduce yourself. Tell me where you're at, kind of what you're doing now.
Well, I imagine anyone over under the age of 20 certainly might need an introduction. But
Sure.
so
Yeah.
I'm Scott Nicholson. I am a professor of game design. I live in Ontario, Canada. I've been a board gamer all my life. I have designed a few games. And in lieu of what we've been speaking with here, I started the first YouTube series about board games 20 years ago in 2005, called Board Games with Scott. And I sort of made it all up as I went along. I did that for about 5 years, and then stepped aside and let everyone else take it from there. But that's led to a lot of interesting stuff. But I focus on board games. And the other thing I do a lot with gaming is escape rooms. Those are sort of my two areas of heavy interest in the gaming world.
So now where do you teach? Where are you a professor at, or how many different universities have you been to, Scott?
So the university I'm at right now is called Wilfrid Laurier University, and they're headquartered in Kitchener-Waterloo, in Ontario. The campus where I tend to teach is in Brantford, Ontario, which is about an hour away.
Okay. And what was your first teaching gig, or what? I mean, were you a professor of something else and it just translated into game, or did you just start right out of the bat? Did they have a gaming curriculum? I mean, tell me how that evolved or how
How
that
did
came
that
to be.
happen? Well, Sonny, sit down and we're going to tell you a tale here. So I grew up on a horse farm in Oklahoma,
Oh wow,
as you can tell by my thick Oklahoma accent. And so while I was growing up, it was the middle of nowhere, and I liked board games as a kid, but no one else would play them with me. So I would get board games for holidays, and I would sit down and set up a board game by myself, play it by myself, start to make changes because, I'd only get one board game a year or two board games a year. So I'd start to make changes to the game. And that's actually where I started doing a lot of game design, was actually just as a kid with board games on the farm. I went to university. My first degree was in mathematics and computer science from the University of Oklahoma. And so during that time, I was involved. I was still playing a lot of board games at that time. And I got involved in live action role playing as well, where I would dress up in costumes and use padded weapons and run around in the woods. And that's how I learned to create an extrovert character for myself, because I'm actually fairly introverted. But through Board Games with Scott and all of that, I've learned to create a persona, which now I know is called a mask, that I can put on when I need to act all confident and all full of myself. I can do that well. I then went on and got a library science degree at the University of Oklahoma, and I became a librarian. Moved to Texas, and was a reference librarian at Texas Christian University. Then decided I wanted to do more and got my PhD at the University of North Texas in information science. And that's a
wow.
discipline of which library science is a part. But you looked at information in many different sorts of fields.
So it
I
wasn't
then
wasn't IT related. It was I when I hear information, I go to IT. Nothing IT related.
Well, it's theoretical. It's more conceptual. So I actually did a lot with data mining.
Okay, all right.
That actually, my dissertation was a data mining based dissertation. So IT was used as a tool, but not a focus.
Sure.
I had worked after my undergrad degree. I worked as a computer support person at the University of Oklahoma for several years. So I did have that IT background, and it was nice to have in my pocket. But so it was a useful tool to use as a tool when I needed it. But it didn't have to be, if I didn't want to fix my computer, I could call someone else to do that.
Now, did any of that? I don't mean to go down an avenue here. We'll get back on the main road, but I mean, you were the first one to do this, on YouTube or have a channel. Did any of that influence or impact or assist you in your channel?
It did actually lead into it because after getting my PhD, I was hired at Syracuse University in their School of Library and Information Science, and they have been teaching online for decades.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I got involved in teaching online, and I wanted to start using video in my classes back in around 2005. And I said, well, if I want to do this, I need to get better at editing video. And so what can I do? And said, well, I could start doing a vlog. That was a thing, the video blog or
Right.
vlog about board games, because that would force me to learn all the tools to edit video and use those tools on a regular basis. So it actually was, even though at that point, academically, my academic work had nothing to do with games.
Sure.
So board games and all gaming was all a side hustle for me. But the getting into doing videos came out of me just wanting to learn how to be better at making video content.
Neat, neat. All right. So we're back in Texas.
Yeah.
And so how did it then continue on into where you're at
Yeah,
today?
so Texas was where I did the PhD in information science, which was over a bunch of fields. I then worked for 1 year at a large banking company there in Texas doing statistics and data mining.
Okay.
And that was interesting. I learned a lot about corporate America. I learned about how bad the American banking is. And then I fled that, and then I was hired at Syracuse. And began to work in my topic area at that point was data mining for libraries. So how could libraries use the data without infringing upon the privacy rights of individuals in order to make better management and marketing decisions? So that's what I was a field called bibliomining. So if you go and search on that term, I made up that term, and then you can see a little bit that was talked about with that. So I did that and then started Board Games with Scott. And it was then I was coming up on a sabbatical from Syracuse, and folks at MIT had seen Board Games with Scott. They wanted to bring more board gaming stuff into their curriculum. And so they reached out to me, and I became a visiting professor at MIT for a year while on my
Wow.
sabbatical from Syracuse. Now, at this point, I'd also started doing some research on how libraries were using games. I was at an American Library Association event in 2007, and I saw Dance Dance Revolution, and I said, well, that's interesting, and started talking with them. And so then I did the first large-scale study of libraries across North America. We ended up surveying about 400 libraries, randomly selected, to get a baseline of how libraries were using games. So that led to a whole new division in the American Library Association on libraries and games. So that was something else that I started then. But then with that MIT time, I got to work in games and education and games and museums. And I said, oh, this is all cool. I like looking at games way outside libraries. So when I came back to Syracuse, I talked to them and said, well, I'd like to do more than just games and libraries. And they said, well, we're a library school. So at that point, the folks at Laurier in Canada had seen what I was up to, and they were wanting to start a new game design program at a campus that had a social justice backbone. So the other programs on this campus are things like nursing and education and indigenous studies and social justice. And they wanted a game program that would fit there. But most people who were focused on games were focused on, AAA video games and all the stuff that comes with that. And so I was different. And they recruited me to start the program. So they hired me. I was the first hire. I left behind my tenured job at Syracuse to start a brand new game design degree at a university. And they gave me a hallway full of offices to fill with faculty members and a room full of students, and said, good luck on that. And so each year we hired a new faculty member and built the program as we went. So it was that was 10 years ago.
Wow. So what was I mean, if you could sum up what your research told you about the use of gaming in libraries, where did that wind up?
So what I did at that point is just try to get a handle of how many libraries were using games and why they were using them and how they were using them. Some libraries had games as circulating collections. What I focused on in my first book was called Everyone Plays at the Library, and it was focused on gaming programs in libraries. So activities in a library where you go to play games with other people in your community, and focusing on games not just as games for kids, but for teens, for adults, for seniors, and gaming programs that would then bridge generations. Because if you think about it, there's not a lot of activities where you can bridge generations like that in a library space, in a community space. Because many of the programs were either focused on stuff for kids to do or stuff for adults to do. But gaming programs can, if they're facilitated and appropriate games are picked, can bridge those gaps. That actually led to one of the gaming programs I've run at a lot of museums and libraries, and we actually just ran at the local library up here, and that is where you bring families together to have them make a tabletop game as a family. And I love doing game jams where you get families to work together to make games, because the kids have input, the parents have input, they walk away with something they've made. That's probably my favorite program that I've run in getting people to work together around games.
So it's funny because I went back to my home stomping grounds a couple years ago, which is New Jersey. I was born in Philly, moved to New Jersey. I live in Kansas right now, which is why I was intrigued with you being from Oklahoma.
Yep,
But
you went the other way.
I came to the Midwest, and it was just really neat. It was my library that I had grown up in as a kid had a board gaming section, and not just like, the old games that, we make fun of now, but like modern board games. And it was a really big selection. And I was curious about how that came to be, and how, because I mean, that wasn't there when I was a kid. I mean, it was all, if there were activities, it was all art related. Or I remember having, watching movies, they'd have movie nights at a library, but nothing as interactive or as cool as board games. And I was really impressed that, this little, library as a kid that I went to had that selection. So that it's neat to see how that's evolved over time. One of the other things I remember when I was going for my undergrad was I was taking a psychology course of some sort, and I don't know why, but one of the requirements is we had to come up with a board game at the very end. And it was funny because it wound up being like a traditional, game that
Roll and move and ask a question.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. The thing that I tell my students in class, you are not allowed to make any games where you roll a die, move a piece on a board, and ask a question off a card.
And so how do you stir within the brain of a student to think outside the box and think more mechanically? I mean, that's one of the things, right, that we love about modern board games are the mechanics, or the cool, worker placement or deck building, or all these really cool things that we love about board games. How do you get them to get into that and translate that into a design?
So yeah, and this is the first thing I talk about with new game design students is I point them to Trivial Pursuit, which is Canadian, but created it set back educational board games decades, because so many games just follow that model of being flashcards with a board and has no player agency. And so all of the things that make games really engaging, player agency, are gone in that kind of a model. And it also creates this situation where you ask someone a question and everyone stares at them to see if they get the right answer. So it's a pretty bad educational model. So what I work with and what we try to teach our students is that to think about what they're trying to convey with their game. What's the message? Because we have our students make critical games or art games and educational games, and we look at the message that they're trying to convey. What are you trying to do? What's the story you're trying to tell? And then what mechanisms allow you to convey that story? As compared to the other way around, which is what I see a lot of designers do, is they start with mechanisms and then slap a narrative on it. Like if you read the opening paragraph on the rule book of Dominion, it's laughable compared to the actual gameplay as to what's going on. Now, For a lot of folks, and some of this has been impacted through my escape room work. And so I also teach escape room design, and I do a lot of work with escape rooms and help them to think about, well, we actually, when I teach escape room design, we don't even talk about puzzle design until halfway through the class, because we talk about building a world, a story, a narrative, and then use the puzzles and activities that convey the narrative. You can think of, and this is what I appreciate, where a lot of games today are thinking about that. They're thinking about, how do we select mechanisms that allow us to take on a role in the game? Because if you think about the mechanisms, that's our player agency. So we use this concept that the mechanism is the message. The thing you're having people do needs to tie into what you're trying to do with the game. Now, we're teaching our students in the program on how to make games that are attempting to do something, that are attempting to convey a message or teach a concept or tell someone's story. That's our goal with our games. With a purely recreational game, well, that would be a question to ask, is, are recreational games conveying messages? And that can be a whole, well, I don't know, maybe the 20th anniversary episode of Board Games with Scott, which is exactly what I talk about.
Yeah,
and I know some people will say, why can't games be just for fun, Scott? Why do they have to do things? And I'm like, well, all right, how about let's flip that into other forms of media? You know, would you say, why can't movies be just for fun? Well, they can, but most movies, even if they're designed for fun, still have something going on there. There's a message someone is, the designer, the script writer is putting into that movie. Something's in there, even if you don't notice it. Same thing with books, with the TV shows. You know, they all have, some are recreational, some are educational, and it's okay to have that depth of choice. And I think that's where games, I'd like us to see us look at games as an art form a little more maturely than we do, to realize that some games can have a recreational focus, but there's still a message in there that someone's conveying. Some games can have other kinds of focuses, just like books, movies, TV shows. There's a whole variety of those, and we can have a wider variety of what we do with our games as communication tools.
So Scott, as you're talking, my mind was going a mile a minute, because I'm thinking, I thought about a game that I just recently played called Forestry. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's from Capstone Games, and it was a really fun mechanically fun game, a worker placement around a board, but it had a really neat theme to it. So I'm trying to, but I don't know that when you say like I'll see a lot of reviews of a game that say, hey, this was great, but the theme could be anything. And so when you say message, do you correlate that to theme, or are they synonymous, or are they different? Because then I wonder about what you think about abstract games, right? Where there is no, I mean, it's an abstract, there is no theme per se. It's, it's abstract. So talk to me about what your thoughts are on theme versus message versus like an abstract game, and what is the message in abstract games trying to portray?
So I'll use there's a theory that we do when we're teaching about game design, the MDA theory, mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. And I'm going to turn that into something more direct with board games. So in board games, you have the mechanics, you have how the game functions, you have, what's going on in the game, how the pieces and parts are moving around. And then you have the theme, which is a layer that is on top of that. And in theory, in a well-designed game, those two connect. That the theme makes sense. The mechanics make sense with the theme makes sense with the mechanics. I have found myself, I've gotten a lot less interested in playing games where the thing I'm doing makes no sense with the theme I'm trying to engage with.
Sure.
I find that bothers me now. It didn't used to, but now I'm like, yeah, I want to feel like I'm doing, and there's enough game choice now that I can choose to play games where I'm feeling like I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing. But then there's another level. And in digital games, we talk about aesthetics. And that's concept is, I would replace that in the board game world with experience. What is the play experience that's going on? Because how we are engaging with each other at the table, how we are engaging with the content, that can be very different than the mechanics or the dynamics are creating. I'll use the Mind as an example. Have you played the Mind?
Yep.
So for those that haven't, in the Mind, you have a deck of cards numbered 1 to 80. The goal is to play the cards in numeric order, and you can't speak. And you have to stare at each other and hopefully figure out where you play. Now, that sounds, if I just describe it like that, it sounds like a stupid game. It sounds like, well, what's going on there? But that's because the play of the game is in the aesthetics. The play of the game is in the experience. It is in the groupthink that develops over playing that game. When you start playing the game, you struggle as a group because you don't understand, well, how do I know when to play my cards? If I'm trying to play the cards, each person has a few cards between 1 and 80, and you're trying to figure out when to play them. And then you start to figure out, oh, well, wait, if I pause for a while, that tells other people I don't have a low number. And then you start to figure out the pausing in your group, the timing in your group, unspoken communication, and this experience comes forth. And then so as you're playing the game, it unlocks because of the experience. And that brings us back to the title, the mind, the theme, the concept of you're creating this groupthink space that is created through so I think you don't want to separate. In fact, in my book about gaming and libraries, I talk about you've got those concepts, those mechanics, and you've got the experience. Then you also have a social space in which you're playing the game. So in a library, for example, you're playing the game and there's other people around, and there can be interaction between other people and what you're doing. It's the difference between playing a game in your basement, or playing the game at a game store, or playing the game at a convention, or playing the game at like a demo show. These are all very different experiences, even though everything else can be the same. The setting in which you play it then comes in and has an impact. But I like to think about that whole picture when you're starting to pick at what makes a game.
Yeah, I as you were describing that there towards the end, I was thinking about I was watching some of your videos again, and one of them I was watching was one on your own game, Going, Gone, and how you were like your goal in that was trying to was kind of trying to draw an audience or have them and I'm butchering this from what your intent was, but it had something to do about people can tell what is going on by watching what's going. They don't have to hear the rules; they can kind of see what's happening. The people putting the cubes in, and I think that's the way you kind of describe the very beginning of your video is, hey, just take a second without knowing anything about the game, look at what they're doing, and can you perceive what's happening without having to go through rules. And so that to me was like an experience. It was you're able to see that. But so let's talk about your game Going On, and how early in your development career was that, and would you have done it differently? Would you have still, do you stand by that game, and how does that fit into your discussion now about the message or versus theming? That was an auction game, Going Gone. Yeah, tell me a little about that game.
Sure. And that and I learned lessons from those from my first game, Tulip Mania, which was done when I was doing board games with Scott. And that game, both of my games were inspired by things in the real world. So Tulip Mania was inspired because I was in Amsterdam, and I was at the Tulip Museum, and the ground floor of the Tulip Museum had an exhibit on Tulip Mania, which was the first big market bubble that happened back in the 1600s, where the prices of tulip bulbs went for the price of a house. And I said, well, that's kind of cool. And so I used that as the theme, but then I did research on how bubble markets occur, and I put the player in the role of the people creating the bubble market. And so bubble markets can occur because some people are, and we see this now with meme coin, what's going on with that. You have people that are smart money, people that their advice is taken by many others, and then they manipulate that in order to stay out in front of the others. So we'll see that now with memes and stocks based on memes, and people will post and say, hey, everyone should go invest in this. But ahead of that, they've already made moves that will allow them to cash in on people taking their advice. And in Tulip Mania, that's who you are. You're the people. And the lesson from that game is, hey, before you jump on advice in something that sounds like it's a deal that's too good to be true, think about the person that's giving you that advice and how are they benefiting if you follow their advice. Going Gone. So I wanted to create that. One of the goals with that game was to create a game that would fit well in a library setting, because that game was made, I designed it when I was doing my research on games and libraries. And I was addressing a few of the problems with games in public spaces. One problem is that in order for a game in a public space to be successful, it needed to look fun. Because if you think about many of our games and someone walks up and watches it, the board might be colorful, but we look like we're constipated. And
Right.
we're just all sitting there glaring at our Arc Nova animals trying to figure things up and counting, because that's, you do a lot of counting in Ark Nova. And people are like, "Oh, it's a beautiful game. What is it?" And then you're like, "It's a headache. That's what it is." So with Going Gone, I wanted a game that if you watched it, you would, people looked like they were having fun. That was important. The other thing that was important with that game, if you're playing a game in a public space, one of the challenges is, what do you do with the rules? Because you've got this rule book. And so I said, well, with Going Gone, I want the rules to be simple enough so that the rules can actually fit on a game component. And they did. So the rules fit on, there's an auction paddle, and that has all the rules on it. And that was a goal, was to get the rules to fit on 2 8.5 by 11 sheets, to make the game simple enough that it could fit on that, so that you didn't have an additional component to deal with. And so that was the other thought with that particular game. The concept of the game was brought about because auction games were not representative of auctions. Most auction games do not create the session, the feeling that you have if you're in a real auction. If you're in a real auction and you want something, you get stupid. Yeah. You bid more than you should. You don't think about it, and it's that auction. And most auction games don't create that situation. Most auction games, you're slow, you're thinking about it. You can't get caught up in the moment. So in Going Gone, in each round, because the round lasts to a count of 10, with one player determining the pace of that count, you get stupid because you don't have the time to think about it. So that was the second thing I wanted to create with Going Gone, was an auction game which actually captured people getting stupid at auctions. And the other piece that I brought in with the game was a concept of play. So I talk about play theory a lot. And the idea of play is, if someone is able to play, someone has some control over the situation. That's a big difference between play and games. In games, there's a set of rules, and you agree to work under those rules. But in play, those rules can be broken and changed, and are broken and changed as you go. And any individual who is playing can choose to change their rules at any point to suit their situation. And we don't do that in games. Well, with Going Gone, and I originally had tested it with a 10-second timer. And the person who designed, or who published it, they wanted to make an app that had a timer on it. I said, no, I don't want a timer. Instead, on your turn, you get to count from 10 to 1, which will determine the speed of the auction. And that creates a concept of play, because it means during the game, each player for their turn gets to make the game be more slow and strategic by counting very slowly, and you can think about what you're doing, or crazy and 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and cubes just fly everywhere and everyone laughs. And I wanted to create, and so having tested the game with a timer as compared to testing the game where the players have the power to make choices, where the players are given the ability to play, that is something now I always like to think about in my games, is where am I giving players the freedom to be able to play in this game-based sandbox that I'm creating?
So, two-part question for you. All right, so two-part question for you. Of all the games you've designed, and I don't know how many that are, I didn't look that up. What's the one you're most proud of? And let's answer that, and then I'll segue into the second part of this question.
Okay, and I have 2 published board games, but I've made quite a bit more. That's in the escape room world. I've made a lot of escape rooms, many of which you can't be seen because they were made for clients for corporate training activities. I led our students, and we made the games for the Red Bull Escape Room World Championships in 2017, 2019. So you can actually see me on Red Bull TV there as the evil Dr. Nicholson, who I was the bad guy who made all these horrible puzzles to put everyone through. But if I think about all the stuff I've created, I think the thing that I liked the most, all right, I'll give you 2. One which never made it and failed, which happens. For every game that actually gets to the play testing point, there's 10 more sitting in the garbage. And for every 10 in the garbage, there's 10 more ideas that you had at some point. And, so you have hundreds of games. So one of the games that never made it out to publication.
What is a game that you've experienced through your lifetime that you would be like, that you wish, oh, I wish I would have come up with that? And, or what is your favorite #1 game of all time?
So the second part of that, I have to give the answer that everyone hates, and that is it depends upon the situation.
Okay.
Because if I take a game that I love and I take it to game night and I play it with people, let's say I'm at a family game night, and so I'm playing with families and kids, and then I take that same game and I take it to my basement with hardcore Euro gamers, or I take that same game and I try to bring it out at a convention where it's really noisy. The same game, even if it's my favorite game, it's going to fail in one of those situations. So you have to think about the social situation in which you're in and the people in which you're playing with before you pick the game that's going to be successful. So there can be no, unless you give me then the situation. But I'll answer your first part of the question because I can give a definitive answer to that.
Okay.
The recent, and I'll focus on a recent game, because there's two ways to think about this. One would be a sort of this classic game that was really smart and did some really cool stuff. But I'm going to focus on something, probably the game from the last year that has impressed me the most. And that's Railways of the Lost Atlas.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I don't know if you've had a chance to explore that game.
I haven't.
So it is an 18xx game. Now I've been a big fan of 18xx games. I've loved them for a long time. They're heavy duty. For those that don't know, 18xx games are heavy duty economic games where you run a train company or one or more train companies. The game is not about you run the companies in which you are heavily invested, but if you sell your stock in a company, then someone else runs it. And the game is about, the goal of the game is to have the best portfolio at the end made up of companies that you bought in and out of throughout the game. So again, if you think about the concept of play, 18xx games are very playful games in that the players are given the ability to have this sandbox in which they are creating this economic world. That the games can be very nasty and unpleasant, and train companies can go bankrupt and things can crash. Or it can be robust and people just run wonderful, robust companies. You are investors trying to make the most money that you can in those games. I know that I will always lose an 18xx game when I'm playing with 18xx sharks. Because for me, the thing I am rewarded by when I play an 18xx game is making a good train company and running it well. But that is not always, based upon the game situation, that's not always the best strategy. Sometimes the best strategy is get a company, get what you can out of it, let it crash and burn, step away from it, and leave the wreckage to someone else to deal with. But I don't like to do that. So I typically will come in second place because the sharks will eat each other. And I will just have this strong company that continues on. It'll never be good enough to beat the shark that takes out the other sharks. Once the sharks realize that I'm going to run a good company, they'll just use me as a tool. And I accept that because at the end of the game, I like to look down at the thing I made, whatever the game is. I like to have it where at the end of the game, I look at this thing that it's like, I made this thing. And this is something I'm happy with and proud of. So I like games where I have that kind of sense. But what Railways did is they stepped back from a lot of the 18xx conventions. And they have made a fresh take on 18xx. They have made, I can get rid of most of my 18xx collection with this one game. Because so one thing about 18xx games is they tend to be set in a historical setting with a fixed board. Right. So as you've played the game, you begin to know that's always a good company, that's always a bad company, you know, or you got to run this. And so people get experts in the game knowing that, oh, here's how you combine these two together and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, and I don't want to play with you anymore. With Railways, the board is modular and you start each game by building the map. Oh, so okay. Every game starts with, and they say in the instructions, you build the map you want to play with. Because you can make a map that's horrible, you can make a map that's really friendly, you can make a map that's segmented, but you take turns adding tiles to this map, and the tiles have barriers and companies and things like that. So that's solved number one, that everyone's on the same footing when you start the game, because everyone now, the map is brand new. It's what you made. It's kind of like Drum Circle. The map is now a thing that you all created for this one and only one time. And the first part of the game is looking at saying, well, what do I think is going to work out here of all these choices? They've sanded off a lot of the rough edges of 18xx. So, for example, in 18xx games, traditionally, when you start a company, you always take a little hit right at the beginning because the company hasn't gotten started. Your company starts with no trains. You have no way to make money. And when you don't make money, your stocks go down. And that's always a really annoying thing for new players. It's like, well, what do you mean? I just started the company. Why am I already losing stock value? It's like, well, because you don't have a train yet. In this one, you get to buy a train right away. So you start the company, you start with a train, you get going right away. The game runs either 4 rounds for their short game, which is about 2 hours, or 6 rounds for a longer game. So it's very limited. Other 18xx games tend to run until the bank runs out of money, which is hard to get your head around. It's very customizable. So the game it's added some Euro-like elements. So the companies now come with special abilities. So you don't have these things where you have special ability cards that then are, and also different companies. In this case, they're combined. So you buy a company, you have a place on the board, and it has a special ability with it. So there's not this multiple layers. So they've just simplified and made the game so much more approachable than a typical 18xx is. You can play actually a very simple version with the game, which plays in about 90 minutes. So it's got a good teaching mode. And then, but because every game is different, I'm really impressed with that game and what they've done with it. They've just finished a Kickstarter to add in more stuff into the box, to give more things in your sandbox. But it's an 18xx sandbox. And I really like how they rethought that whole game genre to make something that was more playful.
So selfish question for me, because that's a game that's probably the least type of game that interests me, economic. And I say that, but then I would have thought, well, I played Nucleum for the first time and I really enjoyed it. And then somebody's like, well, if you like this, you should try Brass. And Brass was something that never really appealed to me, and I thought I'd hate. Then I played it and I was, oh, wait, I really like this. So I say I don't like economic games and I wouldn't like an 18xx game, but I've never tried one. So what would you suggest as, like, hey, just try this one out, see what you think. Could this be it, or would this be something a more experienced 18xx person would want to get into?
No, this would be the game to start with if you don't have any, because it has you can play it in these different modes that are designed to ramp you up. And add in new features as you go. So it's an incredibly newbie-friendly 18xx game because you can play it in. I used to use Steam over Holland. That has been my traditional go-to for new players. It's more of a traditional 18xx. One of the things that's nice about it is it's limited in turns. It's 5 turns and it's done. But I like this now better to teach 18xx because you can set up a small game with it. It's designed to have the micro game, which will teach you the concepts of 18xx, which without getting over your head, without a whole bunch of stuff. And then you're like, okay, did you like, you played this game and had these 3 elements. Now we can play a more robust game that will add these elements. And then if you've played that and it's like, okay, now you've played with this, now would you like to add in and these ways the game can change.
All right. So Scott, what I would like to ask you is a question that was asked me at Gen Con this year, and that is when I've only been doing this for about a year, and when I was at Gen Con, obviously I was hitting up publishers to see if I could get review content to feature on my channel, and I had gone up to a publisher, I won't mention their names, and they're like, well, Rob, what's your niche? And I'm like, niche. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, my niche is anybody who will give me a free game that I can review. That's my niche. And that stuck with me. And as I've been playing more and talking about more games and having more board game experiences, I've realized my niche is heavier puzzly type games. What I guess people would call are heavy Euros, heavier games are my niche. And so what would you say when you were doing board games with Scott? And what was your niche when you? I mean, you're the first one, so I mean, you were the niche. Board games with Scott was the niche, but when you were doing this, what was your purpose? What was your goal? What was it you set out to do with board games with Scott?
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because when someone wants to start a channel, there was a TV series, a reality show that ran called The Next Food Network Star. And what they were doing is on Food Network, and it was a show about becoming the next Food Network star. And a big thing they focused on in that was, what is your culinary point of view? Because they wanted to make sure that people came in, if they were going to do a cooking show, that cooking show needed to have a culinary point of view to make it interesting. And that is something I point, just like that, what's your niche? That's the same question I would say. What is your board gaming point of view that you are bringing to the table that will make your show stand out? And that's the challenge when there's so many shows.
Yes.
You need to have that point of view. So as you point out, that was one of the things with me, that when I started it, there wasn't the whole point of view is that, oh, there's a guy talking about board games on YouTube. But my goal always with that show was to help people find games that were right for them. And it came out of my librarian training. I never liked doing top 10 lists or star reviews, because that is very subjective based upon my own tastes. And I didn't want that. That wasn't my goal. And that is the bread and butter on the industry right now is, it's a 5 out of 5. It's 10 out of 10, or this is what I've got. And I'm like, no, that's not my approach. My approach is to, and just like a librarian, I want you to find the game that's right for you. So I want to provide enough context in a game discussion so that you can listen to that and say, oh, okay, based upon what sort of things you're describing this is like, based upon the experience it provides, that would be a game that I might like to play. I never wanted someone to buy a game just because I talked about it on my show, because I wanted people to look at, when I talked about a game and said, I enjoyed it, here are the reasons why I enjoyed it. But my goal of the show was always helping you find games that are right for you.
Yeah, it's funny. And I say that a lot. That's funny. It's interesting because as I pull up your screen and your channel, and which, by the way, congratulations on your 20th year anniversary. We were kind of talking off camera about that. If we scroll down here at the very bottom, which I would encourage people to do, you've got a video you just posted, your 20th anniversary, 20 years.
20 years. Yes, there's a really old guy down there who's talking.
And I go back and I can remember I was trying to do this before we met up and trying to think what first game that I got introduced to your channel was. And I think it was this one right here, which
Agricola?
Yes, which
besides several
was that
episodes,
split
I played
screen?
saxophone.
Is that split screen? That's you, right? On both.
That's me. Yep.
Okay.
This is the height of technology in what, 2008 was it? Something like that. I had a few episodes where I played my sax, and so this was one making fun of the Ricola ads.
Yeah, and I noticed that almost all your videos there was something fun at the very beginning to kind of when people first tuned in. I mean, is that just something that did you have to think about that? Did you always plan that? I mean, how much effort went into the beginnings of your videos?
I spent more time planning the introductions than I did planning the rest of the video.
Really?
Yes. I no question
what
about
game is that?
I
They said,
hours.
you got to tell us about.
In fact, the introduction to my 20th is something I had wanted to do for years, decades, and I finally did it, and it was ridiculous. But yeah, I spent a very long time planning the introductions to the videos. And then with the video itself, I would teach the game, but I worked without a script. And as such, when you work without a script, you have to spend a lot of time in the editing room. So you either spend time ahead of time writing out a script, but I never liked the way scripted shows came off because they felt scripted. And I didn't want that. So this was me teaching the game, just like I teach the game, and then I would edit it heavily afterwards.
Yeah, and so what made you decide what game you were going to feature on any particular episode?
So we didn't have as many games coming out at this time because we didn't have Kickstarter. So we still had quite a few. But it really was, what did I find something interesting? Is there something about this game that I could talk about Are there facets of this game that I could present to say, if you like this kind of game, you might like that? Sometimes I took on a game because it was hard to teach. Democker and Puerto Rico were good examples of that. Those two I decided to take on because both of those games were challenges to teach. And so I wanted to create a teaching video about those games. And other times it was just something that struck my fancy. And I said, yeah, I think this is interesting. I'm going to make a video about it.
Yeah, the whole reason I went down to pulling some of these up was I know in nearly, if not every episode, you mentioned, my goal is to help you make an informed decision about whether or not this is the game for you. And I struggle with that. In fact, here we are, 18XX.
Yep,
We were
yep.
just talking about that. It's funny. Here I go. It's funny again. It's interesting because just the other day I was on here because I picked up an older copy of a game and you happen to have a video. In fact, you were one of the only ones that had a video on it. And I think I have to, on one of these, I don't know if this is it. I turned the volume down because there's,
yeah, the intro to this one has some copyrighted music as I play with my Camel Empires.
But Ispahan was a game I recently picked up and really enjoy. And I went out there to try and find a how to play video on it. And you were one of the only ones that had one. I mean, it's an older game, great game. But again, I really enjoyed the funniness that you had at the beginning of the video and you make it interesting and lure us in. And then you have a very good curt way. In fact, somebody gave me some criticism on the length of my videos, which a lot of it is in a similar format as I try and give a high level overview of it. And did you do that non-scripted when you were trying to teach your videos? How much thought was that all ad hoc, or did you have any kind of a thought about how you want to address that? Because I go down this avenue of when I go teaching it, I struggle with it's ad hoc and how much time do I want to spend on it? How much of do I want this to be a how to play video, or do I want this to be, how much teach do I need to put into a high level overview of the video? When you teach so I guess the question is when you're doing your how to plays, is that all ad hoc, and to what degree do you go into the depths of the tunnels of teaching a game on your channel?
So this was something that changed over time with my channel. I explored different formats. Early on, I did some overviews, and then I got really into teaching the full game. And then I stepped away from teaching a full game and instead focused on giving enough content to help you understand if it's a game that you might want to like. So this one you're watching here was when I was still doing a full teach. One of the things, so I never worked with a script. I had a few guests over the years. And having a guest where I had to script it out helped me realize that, yeah, I don't want to work with a script. I want to work and just ad hoc and then edit it. And so some interesting things off of that. One of my goals with board games with Scott was that I wanted timeless content. Now, this came out of working in libraries. I wanted it such that, well, you watch this video to learn a game. This video was made, 17 years ago? And it still taught you how to play the game. Right. If it had been like many of today's shows, hey, we're going to talk about the brand new top 10 things that just came out, and here's this other thing that's just happening. Oh, and if you participate in this activity by Tuesday, then you're going to, and it's tied in with so many timely things that if you were to watch that video 17 years in the future, a lot of what's talked about is nonsense. And so that was always something I was very sensitive to, is the content. I wanted to create content that would always be useful. And so that was one of my goals as I'm making. One time I did a contest and I didn't like that pulled me out of that model of not having timeless content. So I never did another one because of that.
Yeah, I've struggled with, because I want to be able to help people know how to play the game, but I always struggle with, do I want this to be a how to play to where they're coming here to learn how to play the game, or am I wanting to give them just enough content to where they can determine whether or not this would be a game that they'd want to purchase, and then get into my thoughts and sharing, so the first half overview, second half my thoughts? Or do I want this to be more, still keep it on my thoughts, but get into much more in depth in teaching? And then I'm running the risk of having a a 40-minute video. Did you have, I'm looking at your times down here on your lengths on your videos, and they're all, you know, 20 minutes, I
You know,
guess,
there's some big
average.
ones. When I did
There's
like Democker is an hour-long video, 18xx is a long one. And so that was when I was doing a full teach. Now, where I changed as time went on is I started doing videos that were not about one game, but instead did videos that covered a group of games. And I was looking at how games compare. And this was tying in, again, that idea of finding your niche. At this point, we had more people doing game explainer videos. And I said,
right.
well, maybe I'll do something different. So if you look towards the end, you'll see that they are now about groups of games, or I'm talking about flicking games. I'm talking about, Monopoly and related
Where's
games.
the
And so we sort of shifted away from games focusing on a single thing and instead focusing on groups of games, horse racing games, dungeon crawls. And I liked that. And I actually did some more of that during the pandemic. If you look, you'll find another YouTube channel that's here in the S. Nicholson channel called Introspective, where it is all deeper dives. And I've got about 10 videos that I made on that, where I got a little deeper. One problem with these is that they don't have a home on Board Game Geek. So if you make a video about a game, it has a place to be. If you make a video that is about 4 games, it doesn't have a place to be. The best I could do at the time was they ended up making they end up making a channel for me to be able to put Board Games with Scott videos that were about multiple games, but it still has that problem. So when I did my 20th, for example, that's not about a specific game. I attached that video to me, to Scott Nicholson. You can find it there, but then it is not ranked in the hot videos. It doesn't show up in those areas because in those areas that you just are looking at games about a specific board game. And so that was at the time, it's not a big deal. At the time, Board Game Geek was one of the primary ways that you got people to learn about your videos, and not being able to have that connection to let people find the content because I didn't have a board game related page where the content could land ended up being a bit of a problem. But I liked, you talk about where my niche is, that's where it is now. I'm an educator. I'm a board game educator. And so the content I create is now, I'm not going to do a long teach about a game. Instead, I'm going to talk about 5 different games and look at the commonalities between them, because that's where my space is now. That's what I can contribute to the hobby, is thinking more deeply about games.
How often do you remain connected socially with board games today?
So I have groups I've been playing in Board Game Arena since when COVID hit. Then I reconnected with some people that I played with over the years, and we are still playing in Board Game Arena. So I have a weekly Board Game Arena group that I meet with, some other groups that meet not so frequently. I am trying now to build up a new in-person game group. One of my challenges is because I had an immunocompromised spouse, I no longer felt comfortable attending any large board game conventions. Even masking in those spaces is still even challenging because they're so loud. So I've gone to some board game conventions that are smaller, and I still like going to the 20 to 50 person conventions. I just moved into this house a few weeks ago. Part of buying this house was buying it with a space to be able to host board game nights again. So I have had, over the last year, I'd had 2 people I would play board games with once a week, and I'm now reaching out now to other people. And if you're out there and you live in the vicinity of Cambridge, Ontario, and you'd be interested in playing board games, I am currently trying to form up a new board game group.
All right. So one of the things that I've had the pleasure of joining in, I've been interviewed a couple times by Eric Dewey. And so you somehow were affiliated with Onboard Games, were you not?
Yeah, I was one of the founding members of Onboard Games with Don and Eric. So.
Tell me about that. How did that start after Board Games with Scott? Was that during that time, or
it was during that time. So Don Dennis and I have been friends since 1988. He is my oldest friend. I have known him for decades. We met at university. We attended a viewing a sci-fi movie club, and the movie that they showed was called Dark Star. And I don't know if it's a horrible sci-fi movie with the beach ball as the main enemy. And Don and I chatted about it as we walked back to the dorms. We were both students at the University of Oklahoma, and we began hanging out at that point. And so yeah, Don and I have been friends for a very, very long time. He's been through ups and downs with my life. I've been through them with his. And so we started, and he wanted to start a podcast. So we started on board games and with Eric during the time when I was also doing board games with Scott.
Yeah, when I had first started my insert company, Insert Here, and Don and Eric, I think it was maybe just Don on that episode, but it was one of the few or one of the first content providers to reach out to me with a business, ask me to be on their show, and I just had a heck of a time. And really I met Don once or twice, and we've talked, a number of times since then. And then Eric, he had me on the show, probably a couple of months ago. And both times I've been on there, and I had no idea that you were affiliated with starting that whole channel up. So yeah, I've been meaning to reach out to you since then and just say, hey, I had a somewhat, what is it, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or I think they're gonna have the 6 degrees of Scott Nicholson in the board game industry now. But
Well, the weird thing about that is then that's now going to connect into libraries. That's going to connect into the meaningful gamification. That's going to connect into escape rooms, all these different places, and that I've had my toe over the years. And who knows where I'm going to dip my toes next?
well, just anything. I mean, the board game industry wouldn't be the same without, I think, all the different content providers and creators out there, and that all stems back from your brainchild and your desire your passion to do that. I don't think we'd have any of them I mean, they all owe their thanks and gratitude to you to spearheading that, Scott, including myself. And in fact, you're one of the big reasons why I just was happy with the name I picked. Although Rob doesn't sound anything like Scott, but but I didn't fight with wanting to change it, because I thought, you know what, let me pay a little bit of tribute to the man who started it all. And that's why I kept the channel the way it is. So thank you, on behalf of all the content creators out there, for your hard work and your passion. And I guess I've really enjoyed having you on here. If I could just ask you one last question, where is it that you see the hobby going? Where would you like it to go? Yeah, where do you see where do you see board games going in the next 10, 20 years? Where would you like it to go?
Where I would like it to go, I would like us to stop biggie sizing everything to make more money out of our games. I really don't like the direction it's gone with the Kickstarters, with these massive game boxes that take up an entire cube of a Cowlax in order to have them in there, because that makes the games inaccessible. And I don't like that what used to be a hobby where people could get access to games that were relatively inexpensive are now being priced out of that and priced out of that access, because we've become so what Kickstarter has done to the board game industry, I don't like it whatsoever. And so if you ask me what Scott would like to go back to a time where you had small games focused on interesting ideas, creating nice interactions between people without having to charge you hundreds of dollars to be able to access that. And I know that's a concept not popular with a lot of people. A lot of people like the toy factor of games. A lot of publishers like the profit margins that come with those. But this industry has become so focused on this Kickstarter monster, from content creators, publishers. You have these games with this crazy table presence and the price tag to boot. And so if you ask Scott personally what I would like to get rid of all of that, and get back to being able to have games that are simply produced about interesting ideas that create engaging interactions between people.
Yeah, at the end of the day, that's what it's. I mean, that's when you boil it down, Scott. That's the whole reason I think we get into the industry, is not because of the I mean, where is all of that bigginess if we don't have somebody to play the game with and to experience it with and to have fun with? Um, I've never, I know there's a whole market for solo play, but even then, you can't be bragging to yourself about the coolness or the bigginess of a game. It's all meant to be shared with somebody at the end of the day. And yeah, I agree. It's gotten a little out of hand. People that know me will be laughing because they know that I like that aspect of gaming, but I wouldn't be upset if it wasn't there. My wallet would certainly not be upset. I think it's just that pursuit of wanting, what there is to offer in your favorite experience of a game that if it wasn't there, I don't think I'd mind at all. Because at the end of the day, it's more about the interactions with people and the fun factor of the game itself and the experiences that it provides. So yeah, thank you, Scott. I thank you for being on the show, for taking time out of your busy day. I know you've been painting. You were showing me your hands earlier. You've you've been very busy with
Yes,
getting the house.
nothing is wrong with, they're not diseased.
Yeah.
As I moved into my house, I actually, minutes before starting this recording, I picked myself off the floor where I was painting along a baseboard, trying not to jiggle my hand too much.
Yeah. So I thank you again. Thank you for everything you've done for the industry. Thank you for your time. And hopefully, here in the near future, we've talked about this on and off camera. Maybe we can have an experience with 18xx and maybe do something in the future on the channel, game related. But for now, thank you for your time, Scott. I appreciate you.
And thank you for reaching out.
Yeah. So, folks, if I encourage you to engage in the comments, have you any pretty neat experience of Scott in your past? If you're somebody a little bit older like myself, what were maybe some of his videos that you have some pleasant experience of, or maybe you learned a game by looking at one of his videos. Do you not know anything about Scott, and this is the first time you've met him? Let me know. Share your thoughts. But more than anything, thanks for taking time to watch this video. I want you to have fun gaming. And more importantly than anything, be kind to one another. Thanks and bye.
Bye bye.